Hello, and welcome back to Security Spotlight Podcast. My name is Max Robidoux from the Portfolio Marketing Team here at Dell Technologies. Last week, we left off talking about what organizations can do to reduce the attack surface. And today, we're going to continue our series of podcasts for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, talking specifically about another great use case, detecting and responding to cyber threats. With me today are a couple of very special guests, Chris, Erin, and Arun. Would you all mind giving a quick introduction to our audience? Arun, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Max. Hello, everybody. My name is Arun Krishnamoorthy. I am part of Dell Services portfolio team. I lead all things cybersecurity services and super excited to be here today. Chris?
Yeah, my name is Chris Wright. I've been at Dell 12 years and I run our Dell Managed Detection and Response Security Operations Center.
Great, thanks. And Erin?
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin LougeSmith. I am actually in the Global Technology Office supporting cyber resilient conversations. I'm a lawyer by trade, and I've been working in data privacy and security for about 13 years now. So I really focus in on a lot of those legal and regulatory conversations about building cybersecurity and resilience within organizations.
Great, thanks. And with that, Arun, I'll kick it right over to you.
Thanks again, Max. So Chris, Erin, thank you for joining us today. It's a super interesting space. We talk to a lot of customers. One of the big things that we have learned over the years is cyber attacks continues to rise, does not stop. But I do want to talk about a couple of key areas here. Let's talk a little bit about threat detection and response. So I look at this as kind of proactive services, Chris. We'll talk to you first. The conventional old wisdom was, hey, 24/7 SOC is meant for large companies. And if you're a small, medium business, mid-tier company, you don't need it. So can you kind of demystify that assumption? How do you feel about customers needing a 24/7 SOC?
Yes, 100%. All companies need to be cyber resilient, and 24/7 monitoring is a crucial part of it. Cyber attacks happen with any customer size, regardless of industry. And in fact, we're actually seeing a pattern where threat actors are targeting small, medium businesses versus enterprise due to a lack in SOC capability and 24/7 monitoring. So it's becoming more and more prevalent that threat actors are targeting where, companies that they think have the more exposure, and any kind of gaps in detection or any type of gaps in capability are being targeted. So whether companies use managed services providers or bring it in-house, it's critical that companies have 24/7 monitoring and the tool sets to monitor them, the labor to be able to understand the tool sets, and then following on from that, processes and patch management, as well as vulnerability management to be proactive in that space as well.
Chris, can you talk a little bit, double click a little bit about the threat detection techniques, the type of tooling and platforms you use?
Yeah, there's a ton. And so from a software perspective, there's all of these like DR type of tools, detection and response tools. So there's endpoint detection and response, which is like workstations and servers. There's extended detection and response, which is inclusive of cloud and network. There's things what's called a SIM, which is a security and incident event management tool sets that can pull all of that, as well as other platforms into a single dashboard. And SOCs and security operations centers will monitor those tools for any activity through events or through alerts that are essentially displayed in that, and I have to respond to that. There's also other areas too. There's threat intelligence platforms. Which pulls in the latest and greatest threat intelligence from vulnerabilities or 0 days that we can do some threat hunting and kind of be able to do some detection even before the tools have actually been updated for those detection algorithms or those any of the signature files. There's cloud security posture management, which monitors the cloud environments. If you've got AWS or M365, you want to be able to monitor those. You've got IPS or NDR, which monitors network traffic for any kind of malicious activities. And then outside of that, and outside of the tool sets, there's other areas which we want to be able to look at. So user and behavior analytics, which profiles typical behaviors of the users, and we're able to flag on those anomalies. So, for example, you may have users that don't really deal with files on a day-to-day basis, and all of a sudden extraction of amount of files will create flags. But on the flip side, you may have users doing a lot of work on those files to, whether it's internal or external, that is normal behavior that we want to be able to, double click and make sure that that is actually accurate without creating false alerts. And then the last two is like some of the latest and greatest ability to detect, some of the threats, which is deception technology or honeypots, where we've deployed fake assets where threat actors will try to attack those first. And then based off what we see from that activity, we can then create prevention capabilities based off that, whether it's through IP addresses or indicators of compromise. And then the last one, which is the big thing over the last year, is AI and machine learning, and being able to use these trained models that can fit into security operations centers to be able to capture all of those other those techniques and be able to identify faster, quicker, and more accurately respond faster and quicker through orchestration and automation. So that's a massive list. But it's everything that, from in terms of a security operations center that we have to take into account for to be able to monitor and detect across a customer's entire attack surface.
Crazy stuff, Chris, but I'm glad Dell is invested in this and we are helping customers with your MDR service. So we talked a little bit about prevention. We talked about active threat detection, response, containment. I want to kind of shift to Erin a little bit. Erin, talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in the market in terms of, okay, we've done amazing prevention techniques. Somehow the bad guys have gotten in. From a data perspective, from a legal perspective, from a privacy perspective, what is the onus on customers to manage those type of risks?
Well, as we've, come through the past several years, I think, more scrutiny than ever has been on cybersecurity. So there aren't really any federal regulations out there that talk about needing cybersecurity, but we're moving in that direction. So we've come through, the past several years with GDPR, with the privacy front over in the European Union, and they're always kind of first at the forefront of change. But we do see, the US government really spearheading this cybersecurity conversation with putting out a lot of these White House executive briefings, having this guidance from, bodies like CISA and things like that. And, they're really, putting the screws to some of these organizations, talking about, the new SEC requirements and things like that. So I think because we're seeing a higher level of scrutiny, we're also seeing, a higher level of cyber attacks. The reason that the government's getting involved now is, it's not really a matter of if, but when. We said that, and it's not a matter of small or large organizations, as Chris just talked about, needing those SOCs for 24/7. It's any size organization at this point, but there's also, they're starting to creep into things like oil and gas. We're talking about electricity. We're talking about daily lives of American citizens. So the government needs to protect our fuel if we want everyone to go on vacation and not have, access to their gas and things like that. So now we're seeing the government step in with those types of things to really, force organizations to be more upfront about what they're doing from an environment and a holistic perspective, not just from the detecting and preventing, but being able to just recover as quickly as possible. Because at this point, I think we've all accepted that it's not really, going to be an if again, but when. So we have to really embrace the idea of what we're going to do as an organization to prevent them up front, but then be able to rapidly recover as quickly as possible, and having really good security hygiene in the front and then great, resilience posture in the back is going to give us that.
That's awesome. Erin, do you also see customers having specific recovery targets in terms of, do they have to demonstrate that they have a strong IRP plan to either regulators or even the business? And I'm sure boards are involved in asking CISOs and CIOs, how would we fare if we have a cyber attack? So is there a little bit of, outside of technology, is there something that customers have to do from a people process standpoint?
Absolutely. I think, just having a big incident response plan in play, really having these security hygiene updates like emails and things like that from an organizational perspective. But I think even, from the board level, again, we're seeing the scrutiny come down from the government. So in the past, from a C-suite executive level, they were able to appoint a CISO or, have a security team that was involved with putting out all of this security awareness information, making sure that they're testing appropriately, and they have, testing is really important to understand what's going to happen whenever one of these zero-day events or devastating, event occurs. So they used to just put someone else in charge, and if they weren't doing the appropriate things or they weren't given the budget, they would just blame that person and fire them and move on. But now with the government scrutiny, these C-suite executives are really having to get educated on what good cyber hygiene looks like, not just from that cybersecurity aspect, but that cyber resilience aspect. So we're understanding now from the top level what's necessary from the top down, and we're getting more money and we're getting better educated employees that really understand the cybersecurity landscape. So I think with that, and in addition to that, the government has also really been looking for incident response planning within organizations, and they're shortening the timeframes with which organizations will be able to report some of those breaches. So now that the government is putting a more, rapid response plan request in place, we're seeing organizations come forward, especially, here at Dell Technologies, asking us, we need incident response. We don't know what to do. Do you have any services to cover this? And we can have that conversation, but then we can open that whole, proactive cybersecurity portfolio to really dive into how we can help them grow as a holistic organization with their cyber resilience.
That's awesome. So just a little bit of time check here. We talked about Dell's managed detection response and some of the thought leadership you shared, Chris, on what an effective threat detection response ecosystem looks like. We talked a little bit about incident response plan, the role of the business, recovery being a really critical need. It's a balanced investment, right? I want to invest in prevention. I also want to invest in recovery. Chris, I'm going to switch back to you a little bit. In the incident response process, I know you support a lot of IR situations as part of the MDR practice. Is there any light you can shed in terms of, we have heard forensics, analysis, specialized IR tools. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so having an IR plan is absolutely key because it fits into a broad area, right? So from a regulatory perspective or a C-level perspective, it's absolutely necessary. But part of our incident response plan at Dell is the success really comes down to if a company's ready from an IR perspective. So whether they've got the teams in place to be able to handle it, whether we've got forensic or containment capabilities in place to be able to handle it, and then to be able to eradicate and recover, which is teams that can not only get rid of the threat, which is sanitize files, sanitize the environment, rebuild the environment, but also be 100% sure that it's not going to happen again. That you've been able to identify and take those lessons learned of what's actually happened and ensure that if it's a 0-day or if it's a past vulnerability, there's a team in place to be able to monitor for that. If it's a communication issue, what we have actually seen where we've wanted to isolate networks or we wanted to isolate subnets or devices, but because they're a critical machine, they've been kept online and the threat actor's been able to continue their activities through that. So, from us, there's plenty of tools that we're able to be able to leverage. Some great providers there in the market. Dell certainly provides services around it, but it's end-to-end planning, which is super important. So having those IR plans and having those playbooks in place, and then at the end of it, having lessons learned and being able to do a post-incident review, and then constant training of the teams, constant communication within the individual company's environments, not only their technical teams, but also whether it's the legal teams or whether it's any kind of, whether they're going to have to bring in external resources like governmental agencies or law enforcement, but then also the continuation of that through tabletop exercises or making sure that their teams are trained to be able to respond to IR is just as important as the tool sets that we have. It's really a collaboration between not only Dell and Dell services, but also the customer and the internal teams that the customers have, which really help in a successful eradication and recovery effort.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. So I just want to conclude with a few thoughts. We definitely talked about a threat response and recovery strategy and the incident response, kind of tying it together. Erin, you talked about how the business is and legal and regulatory landscape is kind of impacting cybersecurity and strategy and decisions customers make. So at the end of the day, this is a holistic strategy. It is also not a one-time be done. It needs continuous hygiene in terms of management. So Chris, Erin, thank you. Max, back to you. I think we had a great, insightful session here.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Arun, and wanted to just echo your thoughts. Thank you, everyone, for hopping on the podcast today. And as always, please be sure to like, subscribe, listen to the Security Spotlight podcast wherever you find your podcast. And to learn more about what Dell is doing for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, please visit us at dell.com/cybersecuritymonth. Arun, Erin, and Chris, thank you again for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Nice chatting
everyone.
today.